Okay, we've just started recording of our session here. For those of you who are watching it later on, we're going to start with Mariah introduction, and then we'll proceed with that.
All right, sounds good. Thanks. So my name is Mariah Busta. I'm the coordinator at Iowa's Dairy Center, which is operated by the Northeast Iowa Dairy and Agriculture Foundation. I've been working with Tad Mueller here with Northeast Iowa Community College. He is an agriculture faculty member there, and this is part of a grant that we've been working on to kind of highlight some of the soil health projects that we've been working on at Northeast Iowa Community College and the Dairy Center. So we're hoping that this webinar goes great today, and this is something that we can get in the routine of doing some outreach and sharing what we've been up to at NICC and the Dairy Center. So this webinar will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube following, and I will share that with everybody. There was a pre-survey that we asked you to complete before. If you did not complete that, that's okay. We'll send that out again. And then, so just kind of think about your thoughts right now, and then there'll be a post-survey as well, which I'm sure Tad will talk about more after his presentation. But without further ado, we have Neil Sass with us. He's a soil scientist with the NRCS out of West Union, and he's going to kick off our first presentation today. So Neil, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Mariah. And thanks for putting this together and having me today. This is kind of a cool topic for me. It was you know, something I probably needed to work on and should have been working on for a while. But I got a bunch of stuff put together today. A few, I guess, examples or reasons why, a few sort of tools and things we can use to do this. And then several examples, you know, from farmers and people I've worked with and how they're implementing diversity on their farms. You know, so hopefully you can take away a couple things today. So can you see my slides all right? I'm good to go? Okay. You know, dirt and soil, two four-letter words. One is a bad four-letter word and one is a good one. You know, and just like Batman knows here, soil is the good one. So, all right, where's my slide? There we go. Okay. So first of all, Iowa is a soil state, period. You know, it's a corn state, it's a bean state, you know, it's a hog, a cattle, a dairy, it's all these things. But without soil, it's none of those. So first and foremost, it is a soil state. It is a soil state because of CLORT, which some people may know what that means, some may not, but those are the 5 soil forming factors: climate, organisms, relief, parent material, and time. And today we're going to focus pretty much just on the organisms part of that. You know, and as you look at that picture sort of behind that, you'll see what Iowa soil was formed under. You know, a large portion of the state was formed under a diverse prairie. You know, a lot of different species, a lot of plant diversity, a lot of plant types and root types and things that did a lot of different things for the soil that makes it so great. You know, in this part of the state, we had a little bit more of forest influence in savanna as well, sort of a prairie forest mix. But again, diversity, lots of different plants doing a lot of different things that made this a soil state. So where are we at? How do we get here? You know, as Iowa was settled, you know, and started farming, we had a lot of crop diversity. We had to, you know, we had crop rotations and a lot of different things going on, a lot of animals and diversity, you know, and that was good. That was good for the soil and it worked. But as we had some things implemented, some, you know, technology and fertilizers and, you know, machinery and mechanization, you know, and public policy, you know, a lot of farm bill stuff, you know, and commodity crops and stuff has sort of reduced the diversity of plants that we have growing on a large number of acres. So as we go through time, you know, through the 20th century and into the 1950s, 1960s, you know, the amount of crop diversity and plant diversity on the landscape decreased. And along with that, on the right there, that chart is ecosystem services and sort of the things that soil provides along with production for farmers. Those decreased as well. So with the loss of diversity, we've lost some ecosystem services. And this is just a quick little thing. It shows a lot of the ecosystem services and things that we need from a soil to function. We probably focus a lot on the provisioning part as farmers. That's our livelihood, and we have to. But soil does provide a lot of other things. And I'll talk about a few more of them as we go on today. So as we increase diversity, we'll increase soil function. All right. So this picture here is unfortunately something we see a lot of times in the spring. And this is sort of a result of some of this specialization in our farming practice. We grow one thing over a large area, under a system of management that, may not really be beneficial to the soil. And so we see this a lot, and soil is one of our greatest resources. The people is the other, and I think, I'd argue that as our soil leaves the rural areas, our people are as well. So we need to nurture these two resources. Just a quick example here about exports. If you take a corn yield and a corn weight, you come up with a number per acre. 11,200 pounds is exported for a 200 bushel corn crop. Beans, if you're in a 2-year rotation, 60 bushels at 60 pounds, 3,600 pounds. So every 2 years, you're exporting 14,600 pounds of product off that field. If you contrast that with a tolerable soil loss, which I hate that term, I don't see how that should be tolerable at all, but it's in the wording places, and 5 tons is what they say is tolerable. So 5 tons over 2 years is 20,000 pounds. Soil is our #1 export. All right, so how do we not be exporting so much soil? This is something that NRCS came up with several years ago, is the 5 basic soil health principles. And it's really simple. If you think about how our soil was formed and the conditions and management and stuff, it's these 5 things. It's minimize disturbance. Disturbance is, physical disturbance like tillage, and you want to minimize that. So, like something like a no-till system is a good thing. It's also chemical disturbance. So we want to reduce the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of the chemicals that we use. So, and I'm not saying chemicals are bad. I'm just saying, we need to sort of get a handle on using them, and not overuse them because it's going to affect soil. The second one is keep it covered. So that's keeping residues and plant materials on the soil surface. That provides temperature regulation, moisture regulation. It's a detritosphere for organisms and insects and different things live there and decompose materials. If you look at a natural system, you don't see the soil that much. I like to look at the soil, but keeping it covered is a good thing. Incorporating livestock is good. Manure in reasonable quantities and forms is great for the soil. Manure is very, very important. Live root year round, if you think about prairies and the native systems, they had plants living year round. It wasn't just, 4 or 5 months or whatever, having a live root that we have in a lot of cropping systems now. So there was perennial plants, there was annual plants, there was all kinds of different things. And the last one, is what I'm going to focus on mostly today, is increasing plant diversity to increase diversity in the soil. And diversity in the soil is probably the least understood of these 5 principles, but it is likely the most important. And I say likely because it's a really hard thing to study, For a scientist developing something to study, they try to isolate variables, and when you're talking about diversity and something with, 20, 50, 100 different plant species, you're really not going to isolate variables very much there. So, you know, it's been a tough thing to study, and that's why it's likely the least understood of these 5. But diverse plants mean diverse root exudates. Root exudates are actually the #1 food source for the soil. You know, we look at plant materials and residues and roots and all these different things that plants produce. And they do feed the soil, but the exudates that the roots give off, it's sort of like, you know, I don't know a good example, but maybe like when you sweat, it just kind of exudates off of you. I don't know, maybe that's a bad example, but that's actually the #1 food source for the soil. Okay, so, you know, I like to tie soil health to human health, you know, and when you go to the doctor for your annual checkup, you know, and they'll do a number of different tests and whatever, and depending on what you got going on, you know, or at least my doctor anyway, he says, Neil, you need to get a little more exercise and improve your diet. Okay, so we can actually break these 5 principles down into diet and exercise. You know, if that analogy helps you to relate it to human health, you know, your exercise is your disturbance and keeping covered, and the other one is what it's eating, what your soil is eating. So, you know, and you are what you eat, you know, and I think that's true. I heard that a lot growing up, but I believe it, you know. And so if that's true, your food is what your food eats. So, you know, if we think about what we eat and the food pyramid, you know, and I know there's been some discussion on the food pyramid lately, but I do think it's a good guideline. You know, it's not a prescription of what you should eat on a day-to-day basis, but it's a pretty good guideline. You know, get some potatoes and breads and fruit and vegetables and all those things, you know, a little bit of meat and milk and all those things, and, you know, lay off the fats and the sugars, and you don't need so much of that. So if we sort of think about what our soil might need, it's just 4 things, you know, a balanced diet. If we, you know, boil it down to a few different plant species, it's warm season grass and warm season broadleaf. There's your corn and beans, cool season grass and cool season broadleaf. So that's actually a wheat picture and then a clover picture. So there's your balanced soil diet there too. So, you know, and like when you go to the doctor, you know, they'll start with a few general tests. You know, take your blood pressure, take your weight, your height, stuff like that. But then, you know, they might draw blood and send it to a lab for analysis, and they can do a lot of different things at the lab. You know, we have the same tools in soil science as well. You know, there's lab tests. The Haney test and PLFA are really good. Wet aggregate stability is actually the Slake test. If any of you have seen me or someone else do the Slake test, put a soil clod in a jar of water and see if it falls apart, there's lab tests to measure that. So there's a lot of different field assessments. Some are just visual, some are quick analysis, infiltration, you know, how quickly does water go in. But there's a lot of different tests out there. Okay. So plant diversity, you know, is and how it affects yield and performance and stuff is something, you know, everybody's known about. Farmers, you know, agronomists, ag professionals, everybody sort of, you know. And this is something a farmer sent me this spring. It's 2 40-acre fields side by side. One was in CRP for 20 years, and one had been continuously cropped, so not a lot of diversity there. You know, and then they took it out of CRP and took the fence out. Now they're farming it as an 80-acre field. And so this is the benefit of diversity. You know, it produced a lot of good things in the soil that make it healthy and productive. So this is a picture he sent me. He sent me a few others. This is actually, you can see it in the field where that red arrow is the fence line. And in the foreground is the 20 years of CRP. It's darker, right? So that's likely higher organic matter would be my first guess. And then, so here's his yield map. And there it is, higher organic matter. So that's a good soil health assessment, benefit of diversity there. And then you can sort of see the areas over here and the organic matter is associated, and then the yield map as well. So this year they were showing where it got dry, in July and August. And that high organic matter held on to that soil water in that droughty period there in August. And if there's water there for the corn, it's going to yield better. So this is a cool example they shared with me. And there's sort of what they got for yields. And this is out of Iowa State. Matt Liebman, he's been doing long-term studies on the Marsden farm. They might be up to 20 years now, measuring a bunch of different things on a corn bean rotation versus a corn bean, small grain, and forage rotation, a 4-crop rotation diversity there. They're measuring a lot of different things, some economics, some yields, some input costs, but they're also measuring the soil health indicators, and they've seen some pretty substantial increase in particular organic matter, microbial biomass, which it comes off that PLFA test I talked about, and potentially mineralizable nitrogen, which is something the Haney test kind of measures for. Okay. So we've sort of known about these things, the benefits of crop diversity and crop rotation for a while. And as we move into how we're going to implement some things on farms, a lot of people are looking at cover crop mixtures. And as I was trying to put the slide together, I don't know, apparently I had baseball in the brain. I must miss it. So I started thinking about, some diversity in a team and things like that, and went to the Sandlot for some reason. And different plants, we'd all like to have Benny the Jet, as on our team. He's easily the best player. He's a 5-tool guy. He can hit the cover off the ball, but he can't do it all. He's kind of boring, doesn't have the charisma, isn't as good as with the ladies as some of these other guys are. So that's why you need diversity. And we got Ham Porter there, the catcher. You got to have a catcher on your team. And then Squints. He's probably not the strongest player on the team, but there's some things he can do really well. And he's probably the one you'd want if you were going to the swimming pool. So back to cover crops. If we look at sort of strengths and weaknesses of different things, depending on what your goals are, if you're after weed control or nitrogen or biology or organic matter, this species might be really good. And this species is actually rye. So the shape kind of matches up there. Rye is good at a few things, but it's not good at everything. Okay. So we might want to throw something else in there with rye. And this is out of Penn State, as I'm sure you can see, but they like to use peas and rye out there. I think they can get Austrian winter pea to overwinter a lot of times. In Iowa, it may not, probably won't. But you can see pea has some benefits that rye does not. So we throw them in a mixture together, and we're hitting more of our goals here for our cover crop. So we're hitting yield and nitrogen here that with the mix that we weren't hitting with just the rye, but you don't quite get the full benefit of each. It's sort of a blended benefit. It's not a straight monoculture. So this is sort of what you end up with. It's a nice, well-rounded benefit when you mix more than one together. So that's sort of just an idea of how it works. I'll go through a few species here and maybe some strengths and weaknesses of a few. Syrah rye is one everybody's pretty familiar with. It's really hardy, survives the winter well. It's really has a lot of good shallow roots and breaks up surface compaction well. The rhizo sheath, or the rhizo beard here in the picture, as the producer who sent me this called it. A lot of biomass, which is good for a lot of things. Weed suppression, scavenging, so it's a good base cover crop here, and a lot of farmers are familiar with it. We did a bit of a comparison of wheat and rye here a couple years ago, just on growth. There is a slight difference here. Rye is a little more winter hardy. It grows at colder temperature than wheat. So they were drilled on the same day, and you can sort of see as it grows, the rye is always going to be a little bit ahead of the wheat on growth and biomass. So, just knowing that, you'll be able to better tailor what you're after with your cover crop. One of the questions I get a lot with rye is it allelopathic? You know, and usually when I get the question, they're worried about corn. Okay, so how you answer it is important. So rye is allelopathic, but it's allelopathic to small seeded plants, you know, which are a lot of times the weeds we're trying to get rid of, like water hemp and lamb's quarters and foxtail and other things that are small seeded. So it affects small seeded things, but it does not affect large seeded plants like corn and beans. Another thing, you know, rye is a really good end scavenger. Okay, so if it's taking up all this free nitrogen that's in the soil, you know, if there's nothing there, that's free nitrogen for anything to grab. So if it's there, water hemp's going to grab it, nettle, chickweed, all these things, these are end-loving weeds. Okay, so if you have free nitrogen there, the weeds are going to get it. If you don't have, you know, something like a Sierra rye, which is really good at getting it first. Moving on to another one, annual ryegrass, probably one that we're not as familiar with in Iowa, probably because of its winter hardiness. It depends. It's maybe a 50-50 shot if it overwinters, but it is really good at breaking up surface compaction. I've been told it has one of the highest PSI roots of any plant species out there. So it's really good for that. It is late to break dormancy, so termination has been an issue for people. Somebody told me you should mow your lawn twice before you try to terminate annual ryegrass. But one of the things that people really like about it is it's highly mycorrhizal. Oats is as well, but so mycorrhizae is a fungi. It's a soil organism. It lives just a few inches in the upper surface of the soil. So if you pull a disc or a chisel plow or something through it, you're gonna slice this thing out. But it develops it colonizes plant roots and makes a symbiotic relationship. I call it a root extension, as you can sort of see in the picture. It increases root surface area up to 700 times. So it's able to access, you know, nutrients and water and different things it needs to produce a healthier plant. So having a mycorrhizal friendly plant in your cover crop mix is a good thing for your cash crops. Another thing we put in a lot is brassicas, radish, rapeseed, turnips. Probably the main three. Mustards and kale fall in the category as well. But it grows quick. It's leafy. You know, animals like it. Food plot, deer like it. It has a taproot, can break up some compaction, and it produces glucosinates, which are chemical compounds that inhibit some weeds. So that plus rapid growth plus leafy equals few weeds. Biofumigant, this is probably more in the mustards category. It provides things to the soil that will kill pathogens and pests. So having that out there can be a biofumigant. It's actually, so I just talked about mycorrhizal fungi. These plants are actually antagonistic to them. So you don't want to have a field full of brassicas. You're going to kill off all your mycorrhizal fungi, which you don't want to do. And they take up nutrients quickly and they release them quickly. So as they die, if they're winter killed, it's going to release them quickly. So this is, again, why you need something else in the mix. So when the brassica releases a nutrient, something else like a Sierra rye can grab onto it and hold on to it for you. And then legumes as a family, you know, probably end fixation is the biggest thing people are after here. You know, this picture I dug up a hairy vetch. It was a really small hairy vetch, but you can see it's really fixing a lot of nitrogen there. And those little nodules, this plant wasn't very big, but I was just shocked how much nitrogen that it fixed. So good thing to put in your mix. You know, there's other legumes. Sun hemp is actually one that probably will fix the most nitrogen. It's one that probably a lot of people aren't familiar with. I have had farmers tell me that if you grow it, you could get paid a visit by the county sheriff. It kind of looks like hemp. So just be aware of that. But but it does fix some nitrogen for you. And kind of one that I like, it's kind of unique, you know, maybe this is the squints of the team right here, is buckwheat. It'll grow quick in the summer. It'll get up and go and suppress weeds. The flowers will attract all kinds of different things. I've had farmers tell me they plant this with their sweet corn, and the flowers attract the predatory wasp, which comes in and will actually eat earworms. And so they have a lot cleaner sweet corn when they plant buckwheat along with it. Buckwheat also will release soil phosphorus. So if you're, you know, that's something else, you know, if you're after, you can do that. It dies really quick. It's not a winter hardy or cold tolerant thing. If it gets a whiff of a cold temperature, of a frost wind, the 30-day forecast, it's going to keel over. And also people have told me it makes good pancakes. I haven't tried them yet, but I will. This is actually something I got from Sayre. I thought this was a cool chart. You know, if you're after one thing, you know, say it's pollinator friendly and beneficial insects, a lot of these benefits overlap, you know. So if you're planting a forb of any kind, they can do a lot of other things as well: erosion, forage, weed management, all these other things. So, you know, most of these plant species are going to accomplish a wide range of goals. Okay, so that's sort of some tools available. My last part here is sort of how people have introduced diversity into their operations. For most people, I guess, in a corn bean system, they've started with sort of this thing where you go in with cereal rye after your corn harvest. You can either aerial apply it or drill it after it's picked. The pictures here on the bottom, it was drilled after the corn was harvested for grain. And, you know, and aerial seeding is hit and miss sometimes, depending on if Mother Nature, you know, cooperates. So drilling is always preferable and more consistent. But then in the spring, you know, you'd go in and no-till your soybeans into that rye. You know, and if you're sort of wanting to implement a whole system here, I would recommend an early group soybean, so that you have more of a window in the fall for your next cover crop. But you can see how it grows, you know, as one thing dies off, the other thing is taking its place, and there's really no gap here in keeping the soil covered or having a live root or any of the other soil health principles that we're after. So it works. You know, soybean is a hardy thing. It can tolerate these conditions a lot better than corn. So this is a really good way to start for a lot of people. Another way is if you have a small grain in your rotation. And I worked with Adam Kramer. He's got a farm in Alameda County. He actually also owns Black Sand Granary near Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. But Adam, he got this farm, which he called it a rental farm for a lot number of years, and he knew it needed some attention. So, and Adam's a pretty smart guy. He understands soil tests and all that stuff really well. So he started to implement some things here. He put some buffers around some areas and put some terraces and waterways and different practices in. And then he worked a wheat crop into his rotation and followed that with a cover crop cocktail, and sort of was measuring some things along the way. So this is actually a picture of me. I was really intrigued by this field, so county staff went up there, did a little data one day. This cocktail, you can see what was in it on the left there, all the way down to barley, and what was seeded on July 27th. And we went out there on October 10th and took these pictures and took a little data, and we're just hoping to learn something. So what was seeded and what was grown were actually a little bit different. But as you go down the chart there, a lot of volunteer wheat came back, which, you know, is something to be aware of. But a little bit of weeds, curly dock, thistle, foxtail. But a little bit of residue, and just a tiny bit of bare spot. So, you know, if you're after weed suppression and weed control, having this in your rotation does a nice job. And then we measured biomass. So we clipped it off at the surface. This is above ground, brought it back to the office and dried it, and had 2,500 pounds of dry biomass out of this mixture. You know, so if you're looking for forage or something, that's something to be aware of. Adam was after soil health with this, so he just left it there to feed the soil. Some of the soil measurements that he found: organic matter increase in 3 years, CEC, and then probably to him the most eye-opening thing was the available phosphorus. The Bray P1 went up, you know, and he was a little, I guess, excited about it. He was under applying, and the available P actually went up. He said, the literature supports this, but I was holding my breath. So pleasantly surprised. And Adam's comments there on the right, and, you know, and he does a great job of explaining the economics of this, and it is as profitable or more profitable than growing some other crops. So I'm not going to get into that, but Adam had a ton of stuff, a lot of data on economics and other soil test results. Another thing that people are doing is multi-cropping. So there's a lot of different definitions here for multi-cropping: relay, double, poly, all these different things. This is actually a project that's going by Ross Evelsizer with Northeast Iowa RC&D. They've been going for a few years now. A few different systems of multi-cropping going on. A lot of them are wheat and rye together, wheat and soybeans together. So how it works is you drill or plant the wheat in the fall, preferably. So you have that live root over winter, you know, and it gets going a little bit. It might not be that impressive, but it's going. And then you go into winter, and, you know, you go ice fishing, or at least I do. And then you get into late winter, and these guys are still ice fishing. And then you get into early spring, and it starts growing again. You know, it'll start getting green again, and everybody will start to notice it. Everything else is brown. You'll see a little bit of green out there. And then late spring, you get out there and you drill your beans in between those two rows. You know, and this is a twin row setup. It doesn't have to be twin row. There's people doing this with, you know, their 30-inch planters, just moving over and planting down the middle. So, but then you get in there with your beans, and you can see there's enough of a gap in there for sunlight to get down to those beans, and to the wheat as well. So the wheat's getting near harvest, and you go through with your combine and straddle the rows. You know, there's the corn head on the left and the bean head on the right there. A lot of different combine setups, deflectors, and different things to sort of push the soybeans down so they don't get damaged and clipped off. And then Ross is measuring some environmental benefits. Again, water stable aggregates, organic matter, dry bulk density. These are all things that he's measured, showing improvements, you know, with a multi-crop or a relay crop system. And then along with Ross's project, they're really interested in flood reduction. And so the systems that are implementing have shown reductions of 13 to 26% in the upper Iowa, and similar in the upper Wapsie. A couple more: interseeding cover crops into corn. This is something a lot of farmers have tried. This is actually a project that Al McKee got a SIG grant for. Eric Novy is the coordinator up there. He's doing a great job. There's a lot of different rigs and ways to seed these. There's all kinds of people, you know, building rigs to do this. You got to pick your plant species, something that'll work good, grow in the shade. So they got a 4-way mix: annual ryegrass, cowpea, buckwheat, and purple top turnip. I've been told purple top turnip is the most shade tolerant of the brassicas, so I think that's why they went with that one. And then you got some herbicide program considerations. You know, you can't really use much of a residual, if any, in this system. So taking it a little step farther is 60-inch corn. This is Eric Miller out of Dubuque County. You can see his mix there. He's pretty legume heavy on it, but he plants 60-inch corn at the same per acre population, so it's actually double the per row population, so it's a lot of corn plants close together. And then he shared these results on Twitter, and he's doing it again this year. You know, if you look at the Orwood silt loam yields in the 30 versus the 60-inch rows, they're almost identical. So a little bit of moisture difference there, so you need to factor that in, but you're not taking much of a yield hit, or a lot of people aren't. A lot of Practical Farmers has done this study, and yield results have been variable. Some have had similar results to Eric's, and some have had yield losses. So it's all about how you do it. So, and Eric is doing some soil test results too. Haney test, just a 1 year. He started last year to this year, so it's sort of a baseline, and then after a 1 year of 60-inch corn, he's seeing improvements in a lot of the Haney categories that I like to look at. The last example, this one's a little bit further out there. I keep getting further and further out, but this is a guy in Winnebago County, right up near Minnesota line. His name is Zach Smith. Calls himself the stock cropper. I recommend you YouTube it and have a watch. It's really a fun project. He's got strips of corn and then a diverse mix of grasses and clovers and legumes and different things, and brassicas. And then he can alternate every year, so sort of the crop rotation thing. But he takes this buggy, he actually calls it the Cluster Cluck 5000 down the middle of these rows, and it's sheep and pigs, and follows it with a chicken tractor. So he's doing all 5 soil health principles, getting the livestock out there on the land. It's pretty cool, a lot of fun. So, and lastly, you know, I guess back to the erosion picture I showed at the start. You know, this story has been told before by David Montgomery. It's a great book, a little disturbing story. You know, when he ties all the examples in of what we're doing now with what collapsed civilizations have done in the past. It's a little frightful, you know, and a unique part of my job is I field questions and stuff on the soil survey and the soil maps. And every September, usually in September, I get a lot of calls from landowners, from assessors and field office staff that they say their soil map is wrong. And I was like, why do I keep getting these calls in September? Well, that's when property taxes are due. So they say their taxes are too high because the soil map is wrong. I say, well, why is the soil map wrong? Well, it says I should have 8 inches of topsoil and I have 2. So this is happening every day and every year, you know, that we neglect our soil and it washes away, you know, and when I get calls like that, you know, and I start getting them more frequently, that's quite concerning. And I, you know, just go back to the story that David Montgomery told. So, you know, when we think it isn't happening, you know, we can see it and we know that it is. So that's it for me. Hope I gave you a few ideas, and I'd be happy to field any questions or shoot me an email and we can chat sometime.
Okay, if anybody wants any questions, you can unmute your screen down there at the bottom and ask Neil some questions. So we'll give you a couple minutes here if you want to try and ask some questions. Okay, if not, I'll go through my part of the presentation here, if I can get this up and running. Give me a second here. So hopefully everybody can see my screen now. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at NICC related to soil health and the soil partnerships we've been going with. Keep in mind, when I say NICC, I'm really talking about the foundation and the partnerships we're working in. Being an NICC instructor, I always default back when I do my things and talk just generally about NICC. But we are a partnership here with the foundation who is hosting this, as well as Iowa State University, and now we are also taking on a partnership with NRCS too, with the newest program that we're involved in. I'll get a little history on our projects here, and as those of you familiar with our foundation, it's diversified its overall goal now. When it first was established almost 20 years ago, its overall purpose was to enhance the dairy industry and value-added agriculture. More recently, it's went through some evolution, and it's including beef and soil health now as part of its overall mission. So just to show you some of the things that's been going on related to soil health, I'll just kind of go back through our timeline. And where we really started with some research and some activities with soil health at the foundation was back in 2016. And what happened there is we got pulled into a partnership. We call it the C2A3 partnership. There is a website if you want to Google search C2A3. Of several community colleges. Northeast Nebraska is the one that kind of initiated the first contacts because they wanted to do some research on their college farm, a community college farm. They weren't a regent or anything like that, and they went out for some grants, and basically are told, you know, just as a community college, we're not going to give you a grant to a single community college. We're going to give it to a much larger audience that has a much greater impact, such as the universities. So then they contacted a community college in each of the states in the Midwest about joining them in a partnership, and we were one of the colleges, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, some of the other states that involved, but they had one community college from each state, and we happen to be one of the one from Iowa that they contacted part of this partnership. So as we started that up, the first thing we were in contact with, let's see if we can find an easy research project that would pertain to every college that's involved in the partnership. And at the time, the National Corn Growers happened to have their soil health partnership going on. And we got in contact with them, and they says, yeah, we'll bring you community colleges on board and help you and partner with you in this soil health partnership, which up until that time had only been partnering with farms. The overall goal of that soil health partnership when we got involved with it, and it was already going when we did get involved in it, is basically to measure and communicate the economic and environmental benefits of different soil management strategies. They wanted to provide a set of regionally specific data-driven recommendations the farmers then could use to improve the productivity and the sustainability of their farms. And again, obviously improving the soil health as they do that. This was the first year of the project in 2016, and getting late into the ball game, it wasn't until February that we were actually brought into the ball game. It got thrown together rather quickly. They basically took on the role of setting up the plot design for us and asked us to pull the samples for the plot. The plot that we were going to write, we were looking at as far as how to improve soil health and affect what we were doing here at the college was relating nitrogen management and cover crops and manure management to soil health. Much of what had been done up until that time with the Soil Health Partnership dealt with basically just cover crops. And we'd already been doing cover crops for several years. And they said, well, we're not going to have you plow up your cover crop and do a cover crop versus non-cover crop field since you've already got that established. So what we did is decided to do a nitrogen study. Thrown together hastily, I thought this was an opportunity to use students to work with this project. We took several soil tests. One of the soil tests we took was the typical phosphorus, potassium, pH soil test that everybody takes on all their farms. And then the other soil tests had to do with the soil health. Haney was one of those. In that process, involving some different groups in this, there was about a 2 to 3 week time period between the tests were taken, and what we found out afterwards is they all had to be taken on the same day. So the 2016 really didn't work out for us as far as research, as far as what Soil Health Partnership wanted. So in 2017, we had a lot more time to plan what was going on. And this is where we came up with in 2017 and a little more outline here. What we were doing is we basically were running 12 plots, repeating a study 3 times. And our treatments were, one is zero nitrogen, no manure, no applied nitrogen. We obviously know that is not a management practice that should be encouraged or practiced, but we wanted some type of baseline to show that. And then it's a little bit out of order on the right-hand side there, but a 75% of what nitrogen we want to use, we basically put on a base level manure and then added nitrogen. 100% of what was actually the normal recommended nitrogen, and then excess nitrogen as we looked at it. And the idea was we were going to be in the study for at least 5 years as we work through that. The goals, identify, test, measure, management practices, improve the soil health, how we can benefit the farmers that are working with us. Our part in this would be measure the results of using cover crops and those soil nitrogen levels. We really don't know for sure how cover crops are affecting the buildup of nitrogen in our soils and our nitrogen recommendation. We include some environmental, economic benefits, improving soil health. We use rye as our cover crop because it seems to be the most common and typical in the area that was going on at the time. Just a couple comments. I had some students working on this presentation here a few years ago, and I basically took their presentation that they started and adjusted it for today. So they came up with some of this information in their research. Again, it was a good project that involved students. When a cover crop is digested by soil, those microorganisms, they're going to restore the organic matter, hopefully bring some nutrient levels back in that soil. Over half the nitrogen that's in that residue is left in that field. It can be broken down and later become available to those plants as it breaks down. They found in Iowa a study that overseeding rye or a rye oats mix into soybeans in August limited the leaching loss from September to May to losing less than 5 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That's research from SARE. And I'll make one comment here about SARE, by the way, and I'll mention that at the end again. This presentation is partially sponsored by the SARE group. And if you've never worked with SARE, particularly those of you watching this video later on, I'll provide a link underneath the YouTube video to the SARE site. An excellent resource with a lot of good information there, particularly when it comes to cover crops, soil health, sustainable agriculture. So there will be a link available there when the YouTube is posted for those of you who want to check out their website also. Why winter rye? The students put this together again. Hardy, it's inexpensive, it's pretty easy to manage. We've been using it before. Pretty cold tolerant. You can plant it fairly late in the season and still get it to germinate. Good fibrous root system, which obviously holds the soil in place and keeps the nutrients from leaching and utilizing some nitrogen and holding it over to that next spring. September 15th to October 10th is typically the time we like to seed. If you're chopping off your corn silage, that kind of fits right in that time plane. Some years we've had some trouble getting that in time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, anything else. Again, reducing soil erosion, suppressing weeds, helping improve soil drainage by absorbing some of that moisture, not letting it run off. Obviously building organic matters, hopefully a benefit of it, depending on whether you harvest it or plow it down. And does increase potassium exchange by bringing it up from lower in the profile, by bringing those roots, bringing that potassium up and putting it toward the top of the soil. Again, here's those fields as we looked at it, 23 acres. Each plot was between 1.5 and 2.09 acres as we put them together and designed them there. Again, we're still in 2017 year. Here's those treatments again that we looked at. And you know how they notice how they have been kind of randomized through that study of what we were working with. Rye was planted late September. This was the third year using cover crop on this land. One comment as we make on this slide here, there were some tile inlet work done before that, trying to make it easier to get the planter consistent through this. I think the tile inlet work actually worked against us. Probably should have just left the tiles where they were at without moving them, but it was part of maintaining the system and keeping things working. So that did affect the results, but we were able to still get some results out of there. Entire plot was burned down. We chose not to harvest the plot. We chose to burn it down instead of harvesting it so that that organic matter would be left there on April 20th. No-till planting. Our college farm is completely one no-till planting, and we got that first year we planted on June 1st. Here's our, and if you can read these, I know it's a little bit small, slightly blurry as I try to blow it up, but this was our treatment recommendations as we look at it at planting time. Again, on the zero plot, 0 nitrogen, then 40 pounds of actual nitrogen, 53, and then 66 on the planter. Then we came back and side dress 0, 67, 89, and 111. So on the plot that was excess, we got 177 pounds of nitrogen in addition to what was already in the manure. And the manure put on at about 9,000 gallons per acre. I was trying to find analysis of that, I apologize. I worked from home on this. Some of that information I had at my office, and I didn't have access to it. It is a little, about half the rate of that nitrogen in that manure is about half what's normal for cattle manure, just because of dilution factor from parlor waste and a few other things. But yeah, there is still substantial nitrogen even in that manure. We went out and sampled on these different points. Those points were established, GPS, and we actually went to those points where we pulled the samples each year as we were working on it. The first samples were pulled April 12th in 2017 as we looked at it. These are the results of samples. Again, this was the first year of the study. One thing you will notice is the backside or the west side, that's in our terraces on the backside of the slope, have lower or higher levels of phosphorus at the 0 to 2 and the 2 to 6, and then on top of the hill we have lower levels. Initially you might think, well, that must be the more fertile soils. Well, actually, this difference is not due to quality of soil. Well, actually, it is due to quality of soil. The top of the hill is a better quality soil. The difference is primarily due to the fact that the top of the hill has higher yields on it. And we just blanket application manure out there, blanket application fertilizer without doing any VRT, any of that. Manure is a little bit difficult to do the variable rate application, so we've been mining the fields at the top much more than those on the back hillside. And the nutrients have been building up on that back hillside. So it's kind of an indication that, yeah, precision farming could help out here if we would vary our rates. But for the plot, we're going to keep consistent on that, except for the study that we're working with. So that was phosphorus. This is potassium. You can see the same relationship. The 4 strips on the east side at the top of the hill on our best soils have lower levels again. Because again, we've been having higher yields there and pulling it out. And some of those fields, particularly on the 0 to 2 inch potassium level on the back side of that hill with those lower quality soils, we're seeing some lower levels. We're also, by the way, you're seeing some hot spots in there on that, which are red. Those areas are typically by the standpipes and maybe wet, which means, again, lower yields as we look at that. pH, not quite as much difference in pH as we took those initial soil samples, but again, some differences as we worked with it. We also did this soil health test, and this is just one of them. I'm not going to go through all this data, but this is kind of the data that comes back from the soil health test that we performed. And I don't have all of them listed up here, and I haven't mapped those out as such because it is a lot of data to work with and map out. So the next was the average yield. As you look at it again, on the left-hand side is the nitrogen rates as we looked at it, and the right-hand side is what we saw for yields as we averaged that yield for the whole plot. So if we took those plots, put it in our GIS software and averaged the yields, if you take the plot on top of the hill, obviously the one on the far east side, you can see that, yeah, no nitrogen had a big impact on lowering our yields. But what's interesting there is that your nitrogen levels at the reduced level and at the optimum level in the excess level didn't make a lot of difference on that plot to the east. Again, this is 1 year of study, so there's a lot of things that could have impacted that. So we really would need long-term information, which we weren't able to get so far. Hopefully, as we move into our next study, that will go. Working close on time, so I'm going to go through some of these a little bit faster here. Again, that was an average yield slide here on the right-hand side. This would, if I take each individual point from that yield monitor, you can see it does vary as you go through those plots also. If you average it out, you get an information, but as you look at the individual points, there's a little more variability even within the plots. They also, as they worked with us, they did an aerial flight over top of the field, and they did a vegetative index on it, and you can notice right in the center there, there's a little bit lighter area. That was that 0 nitrogen area. So it was a very obvious, again, as we look at the eastern plot, where we were putting nitrogen. This we did on our own using our drone flight. This was mid-October, right toward harvest time. Not a lot of green left out there, not a lot of vegetative index. But again, that nitrogen, 0 nitrogen plot is obvious. The excess nitrogen plot there is actually looking a little bit greener at this time. Even though we didn't see a response in the yield, we are seeing some response there as we work at. Here again, and that's where I mentioned earlier, that far east, that is highest CSR there. We get farther to the west, our soils are not quite as good as we looked at that. And they had higher fertility, but the CSR was lower on those. Again, I mentioned that. 2018, the next year, most of my data 2018 were left on my computer at school, so I don't have a lot there. to show you what happened, but very similar responses. Here's that vegetative index photo again as we looked at that there. What we did then is what happened is the Soil Health Partnership essentially abandoned the C2A3. They decided no longer to start working with us, reduced their funding to us. So we went to shift our plot to something a little bit easier to manage. It was great having them as partners. They did a lot of good work for us, took the soil did the testing for us, paid for the lab test, and helped us set up a plot. So we downsized the plot here in 2019, still keeping very similar information in there, similar study, but 4 strip tiles instead of 12 replicated plots. Again, this time, the first one was no manure, the red. Then as we move farther east, full manure, but no nitrogen, so a little bit different. And then number 3 was full rate manure with a half rate of nitrogen. And then number 4 with full rate manure and a full rate of nitrogen as we looked at it and worked across that. And the rates of nitrogen was 25 pounds on 3 and 50 pounds on 4 as we looked at it. And that's what work we did last year in 2019. The yield data, I apologize, I don't have that. That's on my computer at school. We have now shifted to a new project in a partnership with NRCS, and we are doing the same thing, similar things, which work with some of the similar plots that we've done before, trying to pull in some data that we've already had and worked with. So you can see there plots 1 through 8, numbers are a little random. There's a reason behind that, but plots 1 through 8 there, that's our old plots that we've been working with for the last 3 years. But we've also added a few more. Plot 9 up in the upper corner, northeast corner of that first map. That's a prairie that we've seeded down here several years ago. And we're running soil tests on that, not yield data, obviously. And then plots 10 and 11 are in rented ground. What we're doing on the rented ground is we harvested rye off it this spring. We've got a sorghum cocktail mix, and we'll try and provide you some more information on that. Planted in there now, which we'll harvest off, and then we're going to come back with corn silage next. So in 2 years, we're going to have 3 crops harvested from that. And with that, we're going to be doing the Haney test, the wet aggregate test on all those plots, and then on plots 1, 5, 9, and 10, we're actually going to do the PLFA test also. What are they? The Haney test, Neil did talk a little bit about that. Basically is looking at soil health, and again, it's been talked about a little bit. I'll go ahead and skip through that. Wet aggregate, Neil talked about how does the soil hold together. Basically, that's telling you structure. And the PLFA is basically looking at our microbial biomass. It's a little more expensive and involved test. That's why we're running on 4 places, but we're basically running in 4 different types of cropping situations, including a natural prairie as we work at it. Okay, so that pulls through my presentation. Open it up again for questions. Otherwise, we're going to try and keep these webinars to an hour in length. We're approaching the end of our time here. What I again mentioned, as was mentioned by Mariah at the very beginning, there's a pre-survey and there will be a post-survey, particularly at the YouTube channel. So please go down in the comments, hit those links, go to those surveys. That helps us get this grant funding and continue with this funding. So we appreciate that. With that, if anybody wants to unmute to ask questions, feel free. And if not, I thank you for joining us today. And in those of you watching later on YouTube, I thank you for coming in and watching us. And hopefully we can continue this process into the future. Mariah, you have any last words, or Neil?
Nope, thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you, everybody.